today it's a very good day to be one of the bitiest Viking-themed Space Marine chapters around, as the new rules and options from Saga of the Beast have really upgraded Space Wolves to be more in line with all of their battle brothers. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy-focused 40k channel where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. In this video we're going to be taking a look at all of the new rules for the Space Wolves from Saga of the Beast, going over the interesting and new stuff, and having a bit of a chat about what I think is most likely to see play on the tabletop. This is a pretty hefty update for the Sons of Ross. They've gained combat doctrines and their own unique one, the Litanies of Battle, and again their own unique litany. A bunch of new stratagems, including many of the ones that Codex Space Marines got access to when their book was last updated, a very nice clutch of new relics, and of course access to the might of Ragnar Blackmane himself, who will be very much attacking his foes with a savage fury. There's a lot to go over, so let's jump right in. First I thought we'd look at the core rules changes for the Space Wolves. The most notable update that's really going to boost their power on the tabletop are their combat doctrines, which until now they didn't have access to. And this has been printed with the old wording of combat doctrines, meaning that until the inevitable FAQ they will just be able to cycle through them as they choose, but I'm sure Games Workshop will bring them in line with the rest, meaning that they start in Devastator turn 1, have to go to Tactical Doctrine turn 2, and then can choose to either go to Assault Doctrine or stay in Tactical turn 3, and from then on it's Assault for guaranteed. As the unique Space Wolf doctrine is Savage Fury and Assault Doctrine that we'll talk about in just a second, this really isn't too bad a thing for the Space Wolves at all. They're going to generally want to be getting into Assault Doctrine as quickly as possible, as basically that's how their entire chapter is set up. They did already have access to Bolter Discipline and Shock Assault, but it's nice to see that updated in official print as well, all brought together under the Angels of Death special rule. In addition to this, there are all of the datasheets from all of the Phobos and recent releases for Space Marines that the Wolves now have access to. This includes the 3 Phobos armoured characters, all of which are updated with their special Space Wolf names, the Rune Priest, Wolf Lord and Primaris Battle Leader in Phobos armour. You've got access to the Eliminators, Infiltrators, Incursors, Suppressors and the updated Intercessors datasheet, which now allows them to take Thunderhammers, which is no small matter for Space Wolves, as getting +1 to hit on the first round of close combat mean that Thunderhammers are a pretty optimal choice to be putting on your Intercessors. Finally, for vehicles, we have the Repulsor Executioner, Impulsor and Evictor. So literally all of the new toys all in print, which cuts down on the amount of FAQ documents needed to play the Space Wolves army. In addition to that, we also have the Obscuration Discipline and Vanguard Warlord traits, which our Phobos armoured characters can choose to take instead of the standard Space Wolves ones. These could be potentially useful in a Space Wolves army as they generally buff the Phobos armed units such as Infiltrators and Incursors and Reavers, and again as a mainly melee centred army, Space Wolves will be making decent use of these guys. They've also updated the datasheets of the Wolf Priests that the Space Wolves had access to be able to let them cast litanies as per their normal battle brothers, but interestingly and annoyingly they haven't updated Auric the Slayer in the same way, meaning that at least for the present he'll retain his current datasheet. He's not really that bad as a fighty character who can also provide some decent buffs, but it would be better to see if he can cast those new and improved litanies, particularly if he had any special rules to allow him to cast more than one per turn, as many named character chaplains can. I have a feeling that Games Workshop will patch this with the FAQ for the book, so I guess we'll have to wait and see what his new rules shake out as. Finally, they've also updated the rules for Hunters Unleashed, the Space Wolves chapter trait that allows them to hit on +1 in close combat and make bigger heroic interventions, and this now affects all models in the Space Wolf army, not just the infantry, bikers, dreadnoughts and cavalry that did before. This is particularly handy for the Invicta Tactical Warsuit, but also means that your vehicles will be running over people with a bit more reliability, which is quite funny. Let's take a look at that Savage Fury doctrine now, which Games Workshop had teased for us before. This one gives you extra hits on unmodified 6s whenever you're in the Assault Doctrine, but unfortunately, as with most chapters, there's no way for Space Wolves to access this Assault Doctrine early. It's only going to apply from turn 3 onwards. Now, I talked about this in one of the preview videos. I think it's quite nice in that it's completely universal. It happens whether or not you're charged or made a charge or in a protracted combat. It's basically always going to be a flat buff to your close combat abilities no matter what situation you're in or who you're fighting. It's going to be proportionally stronger with anything that gives you -1 to hits, such as Thunderhammers and Power Fists, and still give you a 25% damage buff when you're hitting on 3s with these, rather than hitting on 2s with most other things. This, in combination with the extra AP that you get from the Assault Doctrine, means that basically any Space Wolf units are going to absolutely wreck face when they get to the enemy, as you're kind of doubling down on their already impressive close combat abilities and just stacking buffs on buffs. I guess the only real downside is that it doesn't give you any aid at all in actually getting to close combat, which is Space Wolf's main problem, and also getting it on turn 3 and later isn't really the best idea either, just because the fate of the battle might already be decided by that point. It is absolutely certainly helpful, but I'd see it as a fairly minor buff rather than a major one. Next, let's take a look at Ragnar himself, who now as of this book has his points cost confirmed at 120 points, so a little bit more expensive than I was expecting. Games Workshop seems to have gone back more to the 1 power level equals 20 points maxim, as some of the recent characters that they had released were being released with power level and point ratios a bit lower than this. Still though, I think that this is still a great deal for him for the amount of sheer pain that he can inflict in close combat. I have already done a full video review on his datasheet, so I recommend having a look at that if you want a little bit more in-depth discussion, but he's basically a Primaris Space Wolves character with a whopping 6 wounds and 7 attacks, and instead of his normal shock assault he gets a bonus 3 attacks, meaning he's usually going to be hitting with 10. His mighty relic chainsword Frost Fang is incredibly potent when he does hit as well, being strength +2, AP -4 and flat damage 2. Combined with some of the very nice Space Wolf stratagems that can be applied to him, such as the one to give you extra attacks on 4+ when you get into melee, means that he could reliably be hitting home with something around 17 or 18 hits per turn and still have the option to fight twice. If you stack him with all the stratagems, this guy could easily go through something like 20 Primaris Space Marines in a single round of combat, so his damage potential on the charge really shouldn't be overlooked. It gets even better though, as he has a couple of decent buffing special rules in Battle Lust, which means he can consolidate 6 inches if he is not within 3 inches of an enemy model, and maybe get closer to lock up some other enemy units, and nearby Space Wolves units can do this too. And he also has War Howl for a flat charge reroll, that he also grants to nearby Space Wolf units as well, so he's going to be pretty reliable at getting both him and his battle brothers to close combat. And of course, as if that weren't all enough, he also gives his standard Captain reroll with Jarl of Fenris, with 6-inch hit roll rerolls of 1 for any units that are nearby. He does have the disadvantage of being a bit slow being on foot, but for his points cost there are very few characters that hit quite as hard as this guy. There's pretty much nothing in the game that would happily be charged by Ragnar Blackmane. I could easily see him dominating the midfield as part of an advancing Space Wolf line, being a counter-attack threat amidst some shooty Space Wolves, or maybe jumping out of an impulsor in enemy lines, or using the on the hunt outflank stratagem to get him right up and close and personal to the enemy straight away. Provided he gets into combat with something that he can kill and something meaningful, then he's quite likely to make his points back. Next we'll just take a quick look at that Space Wolf Litany. Again, it has already been shown off by Warhammer community, and here is Ulrich the Slayer looking on wistfully at it, wishing he could cast it. Hopefully the FAQ will help him out. Basically it's cast on a 3+ like normal litanies, and if it happens to be inspiring, then that Space Wolf unit adds +1 to the damage characteristic when it's attacking monsters or vehicles. You could be looking at damage 2 chainswords, or perhaps damage 4 thunderhammers if you fancy. It's a very good little rule for bringing down the heaviest targets, and it's quite good that you can pick litanies in before the battle. So you could potentially use this one reactively on your Wolf Priest if you happen to know that you're fighting against a whole ton of vehicles or monsters. In addition to this, Space Wolves now also get access to the 6 standard litanies from Codex Space Marines. The particularly useful ones are +1 to hit in the shooting phase, +1 to wound in the shooting phase when shooting against your closest targets, and perhaps most importantly for Space Wolves, the +2 to charge range is 1. That could be particularly good if you're meeting a chaplain with some deep striking units, where they drop into his aura range when he's already on the battlefield, and then they get a 7-inch charge out of deep strike rather than the usual 9. Could be good for some Wolf Guard in Terminator armor, or maybe some outflanking Wolfen or something. Next we'll have a nose through the stratagems. First of all, we have 15 and arguably 16 reprints from the new Space Marine Codex, including some that are very useful to the Space Wolves. Duty Eternal is 1 command point, and it still has the old wording, where it's half the amount of damage taken rather than subtract 1 for it, though again I suspect that will be swiftly FAQ'd out of existence. Either way, it's still a very strong stratagem, and Space Wolves have great dreadnoughts, including the mighty Bjorn the Fell-Handed, who will absolutely love to make use of this. We've got all the intercessor buffing stratagems, including Bolt Storm for those auto bolt rifles, veteran intercessors for a few extra attacks, could be a bit more worth it when those attacks hit more accurately. There's also rapid fire to shoot bolt rifles twice, and target sighted to snipe off characters with stalker bolt rifles. Hero of the Chapter is a particularly welcome one, allowing another Space Wolves Warlord to get a Warlord trait, now either through the standard Space Wolf Warlords or the new Vanguard Warlord traits. We also have Hammer of Wrath for impact hits from jump infantry, Gene-wrought Might, the one that gives Primaris Marines an extra attack on hit rolls of 6s, which again could be another way of souping up Ragnar's massive close combat strength into the stratosphere, but could also be good on things like aggressors or any other Primaris close combat troops. We've got Steady Advance, the one for moving and rapid firing your bolt guns with bolter discipline. Could be good for some bolt rifles on the move. Hunter Slayer Missile, the one where you fire off a single shot from a repulsor or repulsor executioner and you get D3 wounds on the roll of a 3+, which I personally like as a way to finish off hard targets that couldn't be killed any other way. Skilled Riders, the one for bikes where on a 2 command point spend they gain a 4+ infall save. Skyfire, the one for Hunters and Stalkers, which is particularly powerful for souping up Stalker damage output. Transhuman Physiology, which will allow big tough units to shrug heavy weapons fire a little bit easier. This one's going to be a particularly tasty one for Wolfen and Thunderwolf cavalry, and will make them abnormally durable against heavy weapons fire, which is quite good at taking them out normally. Lastly, we have another very good one, which is Vengeance of the Machine Spirit. This is the 2 command point one that affects Land Raiders, Repulsors and usually Storm Ravens, but for the Wolves it's Storm Wolves and Storm Fangs, and they can either shoot a weapon on death or auto-explode. Both are strong options, in particularly shooting with those Hellfrost Destructors would be a decent way to go out for the gunship. Now let's look at the 8 new stratagems that are new and unique to Space Wolves. First of all, we have Knowledge of the Foe, which has already been seen. This is the 0 CP one that essentially lets you devour an enemy character in melee and gain 1 command point for free. I believe that stratagems are exempt from tactical restraint, meaning that you could get 1 command point back every single fight phase, provided you manage to kill an enemy character in that fight. Not bad at all, seeing as Space Wolves' primary damage output is using the fight phase, and you'll always be able to use it at 0 CP, so this should typically equate to a few extra command points for your Wolves over the course of the game, and as a nice solid buff to the Space Wolves army. Next we have Touch of the Wilds, the other one that was previewed, and this one really is a spectacularly strong one for your Space Wolves characters who are already pretty henge in terms of being able to destroy things in close combat. Every hit roll of a 4+ on modified will allow you to land an additional hit on the target. This will typically equate to taking your Space Wolf character and just amplifying his damage output by an extra 60%, which is nuts. There are very few stratagems in the game that give you quite this much damage for quite such a small investment. We already mentioned how you can use it on Ragnar to give him those 17 or 18 hits per turn, which you could further stack with Savage Fury, their combat doctrine, or maybe Gene-wrought Might as well, and then either fight twice or fight in death to do all of it all over again. Honestly though, this will be strong on basically any Space Wolves character, particularly if you're using mighty Thunderhammers or things to smack the enemy. This is pretty much a given to use in close combat whenever you're charging with a decently fighty character and you don't think that they're just going to be able to swat away whatever they're in combat with without the help. Next is Death Grip Bite, the Thunderwolf one, where it makes the Thunderwolf's teeth and claw attacks so they get 3 of each, strength 5, AP -1, damage 2 rather than damage 1. So a small but noticeable damage increase from them. It is likely to add up to a few more wounds if you're fighting with a big squad of Thunderwolves, and it's particularly strong if you're fighting some 2-wound infantry, such as Primaris Intercessors or something in close combat. Simple and complicated extra melee damage usually makes for a good stratagem which you can either take or leave depending on the situation the Thunderwolves are in. Next we have Fury of the Champions, which is 1 command point for the standard +1 to hit for Terminators either in the shooting or fight phase. Combined with the Space Wolves chapter trait, this means that you could have Power Fists or Thunderhammers on Terminators hitting on 2s in melee, and obviously it's good for their shooting as well. This is pretty similar to the Fury of the First from Space Marines, but it does have a different name, so you could use it alongside that one should you really want to, and have Terminators from different chapters. Another good one that will certainly amp up your Terminator's damage output in close combat, and is well worth a command point if a big squad of Terminators is in combat with a unit that they aren't just going to easily kill anyway. Next up we have another damage buff for Terminators that can also be applied to regular Wolfguard as well. This one costs 1 command point, and your Wolfguard unit will get to inflict a mortal wound on the enemy for each wound roll of 6 that they make in close combat, provided they are in combat with infantry. I think it's going to be best used when you're fighting a heavily armoured foe where their points per wound cost is pretty high, particularly potent on things like 1 wound infantry with decent saves, such as Space Marine veterans with storm shields for example. There's a bit of a theme here, plenty of close combat buffs that you can either take or leave depending on the situation that your unit is in. Sticking with that theme, we also have something for the Fenrisian Wolves or Cyber Wolves. If they're within 3 inches of a Space Wolf infantry or cavalry unit, then they get to reroll their hit rolls, so again can give them just a little bit of extra bite, presuming that they have some friendly Space Wolves in the near vicinity. I think that this one's only going to be worth it if you have a very big squad of Fenrisian Wolves. As compared with some of your other units, their damage output just isn't quite as good, compared with looking at something like Wolfen or Thunderwolf Cavalry for example. Next we have possibly one of the strongest ones out of this whole set, which is Countercharge, and it's essentially identical to Unbridled Ardor, the Blood Angel's one that allows any unit to heroically intervene. Not only that, but any unit can heroically intervene 6 full inches, meaning that if your opponent leaves any unit in their army within 6 inches of any of your Space Wolf units, then you get to hit them in close combat should you want to spend the command points. This is really a decent buff to the entire army, just because it means that your opponent will know that they have to keep out of that distance if they don't want to be hit by whichever unit that is. This really is going to mess with their positioning, particularly around objectives. You can't just stand right next to a Space Wolf unit and take the objective away from them, unless you're prepared to fight them in close combat as well. This is a really strong stratagem. I strongly suspect it will see a lot of play in Space Wolf armies, as if you can ever pay 1 command point for another round of close combat with something like Thunderwolves or Wolfen for example, then it's pretty much a given that you should do so. Next we have Crushing Charge, which is another Thunderwolf cavalry buff, which is essentially impact hits for Thunderwolves. Basically every Thunderwolf model that finishes within 1 inches of an enemy unit, on a 2+, you take a mortal wound on that unit. Now Thunderwolves do have quite big bases as they go, so it might be a touch tricky to fit all 6 of them if you do have a max squad within 1 inches of the enemy, but even so, if you can still manage to get 3 in, then that should be around 2 to 3 mortal wounds. As always, it's going to depend on the exact enemy you're charging, and whether you think that you can kill them anyway with the Thunderwolves, as to whether or not this one is going to be worth it. Finally, we have Storm Strike for 1 command point, which affects the Hellfrost Destructor on a Stormfang gunship. Basically for 1 command point, you add 1 to the hit roll, wound roll and damage roll of the beam, making it flat better against all targets. Just for sake of argument, if you are firing the focus beam at a Leman Russ tank for example, you'll get an average of 3 or 4 wounds without using this stratagem. With the stratagem, you'll get an average of 7 or 8 wounds. So it is quite powerful. It's likely to equate to a boost of about 4 wounds on your ideal vehicle target prey. To my mind, this could be very much worth a command point, though I'm not entirely convinced it would persuade me to buy a Stormfang gunship if I wasn't already using one for my strategy in the first place. So overall for the stratagems, Space Wolves have now gained a ton of options, many of which are very usable indeed. Killing characters for command points will allow you to use more of them as well, and that's basically a bonus for free, so it's really good. Getting Duty Eternal for Dreadnoughts is great, Transhuman Physiology for Thunderwolves and Wolfen is great, access to Hero of the Chapter for extra Warlord traits is very useful indeed. Touch of the Wild for extra hits on characters is absolutely nuts and is really strong, and I suspect we'll see loads of play. And the one that allows your troops to heroically intervene 6 inches just makes your army a whole load more threatening as a whole, and can really mess with your opponent's movement, or potentially get you entire extra fight phases for just 1 command point. When put together, all of these really help take Space Wolves to the next level. Finally, we come to the new relics of the Fang for the Space Wolves. There are more here than I was expecting. They really have gained a decent amount of options with this, but unfortunately, like Dark Angels and Blood Angels, they are still limited to just the 3 relics as per the stratagem in the Codex. It hasn't been updated in line with Codex Space Marines. First of all, we have the Mountain Breaker Helm. This is a infantry character relic, where after they fight on a 2+, they deal D3 mortal wounds to their opponent. Furthermore, if they happen to be a warlord and they slay an enemy character with these mortal wounds, then they count as having done their deed of legend, allowing them to get their aura ability from their warlord trait. This could be very nice indeed for the deeds of legend that are very hard to achieve and unlock a powerful boost to nearby units. To be honest though, getting a random flat D3 mortal wounds on the opponent isn't too bad a bonus for a relic, and it is actually a legitimate buff to close combat that you might consider buying. I think it could be most useful on some sort of jump warlord to help get it into close combat quickly, maybe equipped with a thunder hammer as well, to really put the hurt onto the enemy. Next we have Worm Splitter, the relic power axe that was seen in the Warhammer community preview. As we saw before, it's strength +1, AP -2 and damage 2, and flat damage 4 versus vehicles and monsters. Now it's fun, don't get me wrong, but personally I'd just rather have a power fist the majority of the time, which will do decent if not better damage to some vehicles, and save my relic slot for something else. A relic power fist with the mastercrafted weapon, I believe will outshine this in literally every circumstance. It's well worth it for just a few points more. Next we have the Talisman of Storms, the one that affects rune priests. When their first psychic power is used in the phase, any enemy units within 12 inches take a mortal wound on a roll of a 4+. It sounds like it would deal some decent damage across an enemy army, particularly if a lot of them have bunched up in a big castle, but to get the rune priest there will involve throwing them right into the heart of the enemy, so you might be a bit lucky to have this go off more than once. For me it's not awful, but I'd prefer to have some of the other options on this list. Next we have Storm Song, which is a mastercrafted stalker bolt rifle, so can be given to your Primaris characters. It replaces its profile for a heavy one-shot with 36 inches, strength 6, AP-3 and a flat damage of 3, and it can target enemy characters. So it's a decently powerful sniper weapon overall, and it could still put in some decent work against light vehicles or flyers due to its high strength of 6. Not a bad upgrade on the base model. If you are running a Primaris battle leader with a stalker bolt rifle, it could be worth the upgrade in some matchups, but probably not one that I would actually take the Primaris leader to get, if you know what I mean. Next we have Wordbane, which is a relic force sword, or runic sword as they're called in Space Wolves. This one replaces the base profile to be a strength +1, AP-4 and damage D3. It can re-roll the wound roll and gives a flat 3 damage versus psychers. It does somewhat increase the damage output of your rune priests if you do want to throw them into close combat as well, but in general rune priests and librarians aren't quite as strong as their captain counterparts. I generally have them hovering behind the lines just a little bit, supporting everyone with the decent powers, and leave the fighting to the wolf lords. Next we have possibly the best relic on this list, which are the Morkai's Teeth Bolts. These are another relic upgrade for a bolt weapon, so you could put them in a storm bolter or a stalker bolt rifle that your characters are carrying, for example, and you trade out the weapon's profile for taking a single shot on the target. If the shot hits, the target takes a single mortal wound, but perhaps more powerfully for the rest of that turn, any of your Space Wolves attacking that unit get to reroll wound rolls of 1 against that target. This happens both in the shooting and fight phase, so it's very flexible indeed, and I think it's just a really strong relic overall. Basically you just want to be ploughing this into the biggest, scariest threat in your opponent's army that you're going to want to focus this turn. It takes a mortal wound, and then all of your Space Wolves get better at killing it. A really good relic, this one. I would strongly consider it whenever I'm taking relics for a Space Wolves army. Next we have the Companion's Blade, which is a power sword or mastercrafted power sword, and this one gains strength +2, AP-3 and damage 2. And you get to reroll the wound roll if you're less than 3 inches from another Space Wolves character, so it's good for characters that are operating as a pair. Maybe it could be good for a Wolfguard battle leader that's escorting a Wolf Lord around, providing the 2 sets of rerolls. But again, as with many relic power swords, I would honestly just recommend just buying in a Power Fist instead, particularly in Space Wolves where they swing those Power Fists extra accurately, as to do about the same damage, and then you can spend your relic slot on something even more fun. For the unique relics, the last one is the Wolf Tail Talisman, which is an 18-inch aura of -2 to psychic tests for enemies. So your wolf character becomes some sort of mini Colexus assassin, making it very difficult for key powers to go off. As is usually the case with these ones, your opponent can just drop their psychers back a bit to be out of range of this, but that's not always going to be possible, particularly if they have some sort of psyker that wants to be getting up in the face of your opponent, and they might have to eat the -2 to cast, which could let them fail some key powers. Certainly a decent buy-in against any psyker-heavy army. Finally, we have the 4 generic ones that are usually given as special issue war gear to successor chapters, though of course the Space Wolves don't have successor chapters, so they're basically just extra relics that the chapter can access. The Adamantine Mantle gives a 5+ Feel No Pain type save to make your characters just flatly tougher. The Runic Armour can give a 2+, 5+ Invul save, usually best on supporting characters like Rune Priests if you really need them to be extra durable. Digital Weapons is the fairly underwhelming one, where 1 additional attack does a mortal wound, which seems pretty much flatly inferior to the Mountain Breaker Helm in the Space Wolves army. But finally, to round it off on a very positive note, is the access to the Mastercrafted weapon that takes any weapon and makes it just that bit killier with +1 damage. I can honestly see this one being taken all over the place in Space Wolf lists. Flat 4 damage Thunderhammers hitting on 2s are exactly what your characters are going to want to be swinging, and it's definitely one of the most competitive choices out there. From the relics, my favourite are the Morkai's Teeth Bolts for a handy mortal wound and also making that target die much easier, the Mountain Breaker Helm for that D3 mortal wounds after fighting, and that Mastercrafted weapon for flat uncomplicated increased damage. So overall, this is a very solid little update for the Space Wolves. I wouldn't say anything enormously groundbreaking compared with what we're expecting, but a number of small, solid buffs that will increase the army's power as a whole, and some nasty tricks, stratagems and relics that are going to make the characters hit it harder in combat than they ever did before. The highlights of this book for me are Ragnar's blender of attacks, gaining combat doctrines, extra command points for killing characters, the one that makes your characters hit again on force, the heroic intervention on any unit, and those relics that I just talked about, particularly those nice Morkai's Teeth bolts. I'll be interested to see what all of these options do for the Space Wolf army, and I'll most certainly be starting some Space Wolf reviews on the channel starting this week, where we'll be putting some of their units under the microscope and seeing how best we can fill them with all these new toys. So feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see that. Let me know your thoughts and opinions on all these new goodies down in the comments below. Are they going to change your list much, or is it a fairly underwhelming update? It'd be good to hear all opinions. Finally, if you'd like to help support the channel and you live in the UK, I do have an Element Games affiliate link down in the description below. If you're thinking of buying some Warhammer in the near future and you'd like to help support the creation of future videos, then consider giving that link a click and ordering through Element the next time you buy some stuff in. Element gives a reasonable discount on Games Workshop products, and a small amount of the profits go to support Auspex Tactics without costing you any more at all. So if you would like to help support the channel, then that can be a nice way to do so, if you were going to buy anything anyway. In any case, thank you very much for listening. Really looking forward to reviewing some of the Sons of Bloss, and I'll hope to see you guys in the next episode.